Power, live from Washington, D.C.
Tonight, ceasefire on the brink. A fragile ceasefire faces its biggest test yet after Iran and Israel trade their most serious attacks since April. Both sides pledged to stop shooting for now, raising questions over how long the peace can hold. Plus, a week in Washington, Republicans face two major tasks this week: pass a colossal reconciliation bill and renew FISA before its Friday deadline. Senator Roger Marshall joins us to talk the hurdles facing the GOP agenda. Plus, Trump heads to the Garden. In just a few hours, the Knicks host the Spurs for Game 3 of the NBA Finals at Madison Square Garden, with President Trump in attendance. His visit is turning the heart of Midtown into a high-security zone at the height of rush hour, with street closures, tighter screening, and major disruptions around Penn Station. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Kaylee, we lead off tonight with developments around the fragile ceasefire in the Middle East. Iran now saying it has ended its recent wave of strikes against Israel, with Israel saying the same about Iran, but adding that it will continue strikes in South Lebanon at full force. Leading things off for us this evening, Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson with us here in our Washington bureau. Wendy, it's getting to be a little bit difficult to call this a ceasefire at this point with daily skirmishes. Has there been any trading of fire since this morning?
Not since this morning, no. And that is partially because Donald Trump, told them both in social media posts and in a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to basically knock it off, that this is not anything he needed right now. Yeah. That's a problem politically, however, for Netanyahu, because he cannot look like he's Trump's puppet. And so he may decide once again, if Hezbollah strikes Israel or fires anything at Israel, that he may decide to ignore these warnings and go back and attack southern Beirut again. Iran has said if they do that, and they use this very flowery language, there will be, forceful generational change and, that sort of thing, and they will tend to wipe them out. But this sort of little missile, and all the missiles that Iran fired at Israel were intercepted. So no one was hurt from the Iranian side. But this could go on indefinitely. Trump doesn't seem to be moving the ball along toward making a deal. We don't even think there are real negotiations going on. What we think is happening is that people are passing papers back and forth, and it takes days on the Iranian end, it takes days on this end. And so this could just keep going, and yet Trump can say we're not in a war because the U.S. isn't shooting anybody.
Well, of course, President Trump says a lot of things. He also said in an interview with the Financial Times that he's calling the shots, not Israel, only for Israel to then retaliate against Iran, against President Trump's wishes. He also said in an interview with Meet the Press a number of things about Iran, but also on the anti-weaponization fund that the DOJ said last week is dead, and yet he seems, verbally at least, to want to revive. He said, and this is a quote, "I think the weaponization fund is a great idea. So do many other Republicans. You have to get it approved. If they approved it, that's great. If they don't get it approved, I'd be disappointed." He keeps bringing this back into the conversation.
He does. And as we know, Trump likes to get his way. And when he doesn't, he's very disappointed. And that must have landed like such a thud across Capitol Hill. Because remember, that handful of Republicans gave up in their quest to join Democrats and vote against the immigration package if it included funding for the thing, for this fund, because Blanche promised them, the Attorney General, acting Attorney General, promised them that this fund was dead. And so only to find out after they've caved to their leadership, after they've decided to go along and take Blanche at his word, they get this statement from Trump. So that clearly means he's going to try to keep it alive. And in that interview, he went on, and Kristen Welker asked him, does that include people who assaulted police officers? And he sort of wavered. He didn't say no. And so I think this may come up again this week on the Hill.
We'll see. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, thank you so much. And we want to go live to the Hill now. Joining us now for more on this and other subjects is Republican Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas, a member of the Senate Budget and Finance Committees. Senator, welcome back to Bloomberg. As we're having this live conversation around the anti-weaponization fund, President Trump made it official as the White House sent the nomination of Todd Blanche to become the Attorney General to the Senate. How difficult is that confirmation going to be, or how much more difficult if the president continues to suggest he would like to see this weaponization fund come to fruition?
Well, look, I think this will continue to be a skins and shirts baseball game that we're playing, or basketball game that we're playing. It's the NBA finals tonight as well, so it's a skins and shirts basketball game. The Republicans will support the nominee. The Democrats won't. There'll be lots of pomps and circumstance and people posturing. But I tell you what, he came to a Republican conference and took about as much fire as I've ever seen someone from the cabinet come and take from a group of senators. He took all barrels, both barrels on. He answered honestly. When he had an answer, he gave an answer. If he didn't have one, said, look, I'm going to find the answer to that as well. I think he's going to do a heck of a job as Attorney General.
He also said in testimony, Senator, that the administration was not going to be pursuing an anti-weaponization fund. Some people took him at his word. The president has been saying otherwise, though. If, in fact, Donald Trump wants this to happen, would you support this in concept?
Well, it's all about the details of this, right? Look, I don't want the federal government being weaponized against anybody. But if it's a person that was convicted of a violent crime that attacked a police officer, of course not. But I do think there should be some type of recourse for people that have had the government weaponized against them. We've seen it happen. Christian groups, conservative groups, targeted by the Internal Revenue Service. So it does happen. It's all about the details of it. But I'm telling you what, it's not my priority list right now. My priorities right now are to get for the House to finish the funding for ICE, for Border Patrol, and then let's get on down. Let's figure out what to do with FISA. Then let's get on to E-15 and other things that matter, at least to matter to folks back home.
Well, what will be done with FISA, Senator? What's it going to take to get that over the finish line, as Democrats obviously have protested the tapping of Bill Pulte as the acting director of national intelligence? Does the president need to nominate someone else for that role in order to meet Friday's deadline?
Well, we can sure make this really, really complicated. And FISA is complicated. That's the challenge. Honestly, every morning I wake up and I pray that I would do justice. And as I sit here and look at FISA, I see two conflicting situations here. You know, number one is I want to make sure we have national security, maintain national security, which is why this FISA Foreign Surveillance Court was set up. On the other hand is over here is Americans' right to privacy. So whenever you have a foreign person talking to an American citizen, that's where the challenge is. So I think all we need to do is tighten up the language a little bit more. They're getting there. So I think we just don't got the language quite right. I don't think the nomination of these people, we're not going to get the Democrats, many of them, to vote for it any. It's to them, this is a political battle. They want to do everything they can to attack Donald Trump, slow down his policy. I think the Republicans, we want to get things done, and there's a right way to do FISA, and I hope that we figure it out this week.
Okay. Do you expect that it will be renewed on Friday, though, Senator? There seem to be still some questions lingering about this. You're going to need a good handful, in fact, more than a handful of Democrats to make this happen.
Yeah, my guess is the Senate moves really, really slowly, as we'll have to have some type of an extension yet. If something suddenly comes together, great. I think you're looking at an extension, though.
Okay, well, as we look ahead to that on Friday, obviously, as you alluded to last Friday, the Senate was able to advance the budget reconciliation package that is now in the House. We'll see whether or not they can actually pull off that vote tomorrow. That's reconciliation 2.0, Senator. And given that you have a seat on the Budget Committee, I wonder if you can shed some light as to whether or not there are realistic conversations happening about reconciliation 3.0. Are we going to see that this Congress?
Well, I'm sure going to die trying to get this reconciliation 3.0 that we need to be locked in on the cost of living. It's going to be things to address the cost of living. So you think about under Joe Biden, the cost of health care, of housing, of child care, they all went up 50%. So people are feeling the burn of that. So let's do things that can impact health care. Our lead bill is a price tags bill, forcing every health care provider to list their prices up front. We think that would drive down the cost of health insurance $1,000 a month. So there's things we can do in housing. There's things that we can do with property insurance as well, child care. So let's use it to focus on the cost of living, maybe even more tax cuts if that's possible as well.
Knowing that prices have been going up for this president as well, Senator, I want to ask you specifically about a cause and effect that does come through with higher prices when it comes to food, and more specifically beef. I never thought I'd be asking you about something called the screw worm, but I know you've been talking about it quite a lot lately, a very real issue that affects you on the Agriculture Committee and, of course, at home in Kansas. The New World screwworm threatens to spike beef costs, hurt the industry. What are you doing to stop the spread?
Yeah, well, we got this. We've been anticipating this moment for several years. As we saw millions of people come out of Central America, through Mexico and America, we knew that they were bringing this screwworm back with them, that we had it contained to Central America. We knew it was working up this way. So we know how to address the situation. Your food is safe. We will never let a head of cattle that's infected with this get into the system, go through the processing. It's a very open, fleshy wound. Anyone can see this. So we're not going to let it into the system. We've got great treatments out there for it. Ivermectin is one example of what works for it. And then we know how to stop the spread of it as well. It's not spread like COVID or a flu through a cough. It's spread through the screwworm fly that deposits its eggs in an open wound of an animal. And forgive me here for going biology on you, but the screwworm, the female screwworm, all she does is she mates one time and lays eggs, she dies. So she can only mate one time. And what we do is we grow these male screwworm flies that are sterile. We sterilize them with gamma radiation. They breed together, and then she lays sterile eggs and she dies. So we had this in the 1960s when I was a young lad, and we were able to get through it then. But we had eradicated it, so we stopped these screwworm factories, so to speak. But we have one in Panama already. We're building one in Mexico, building one in Texas. It may take us a year. And if I could, here's the economic significance of this right now, that typically 1 million head of cattle come across the border from Mexico every year, live cattle. So we've stopped that. That's about 1/13 of the amount of cattle that we harvest every year. We usually harvest about 13 million, so 1 million of them have stopped. So on top of just the small supply, the smallest herd we've had in my lifetime in America, we've lost this 1/13 of our supply as well.
Well, and we appreciate the biology lesson from Dr. Roger Marshall, but Senator Roger Marshall as well. If we could talk about the policy and funding side of this, could this have been avoided had there not been cuts earlier in the Trump administration to programs that specifically targeted screwworm and its spread?
It's hard for me to go back through all the history, but from the second I remember talking to Secretary Rawlings about this, we started adding more funds to it. So I know that we've been talking about this really right from the very, very early beginnings. We knew what we needed to do. I'm disappointed that the previous administration, the Biden administration, didn't start making these screwworm male laboratories where we're sterilizing these flies. So that's probably where the mistake was as well. So we can cast the blame. I'd have to really dig in to see who was late when. But what I remember is the previous administration didn't start these laboratories in a timely fashion.
It can fly, right? I know we call it a worm, but can a screwworm fly over the border wall even? Yeah. So it's a two stages. So the fly, it flies around, and then it lays its eggs, which turn into larvae, and that's the worm that we have. So typically, how it's transmitted is it gets on a deer. That's probably a deer, a coyote, some type of an animal. Maybe it's a pet. That's how it's probably crossed the border. That's why we knew it was going to get here as well. So it's not going to be coughed on by somebody. It's going to be carried across the border by a live animal. In this case, most likely some type of wild animal.
Well, and we know, obviously, that this is important to the agricultural sector. So, too, Senator, is fertilizer prices. In our final moment with you, what are you hearing from farmers as to how long they are able to withstand not just the fertilizer issue, but also higher diesel prices, as well as we continue to have this stalemate in the Middle East? Can farmers stand for this to go to Labor Day, as the president has suggested?
Well, we may have to help them some more, and we've helped them already, but you nailed it. The number one issue back home is the input cost. It's fertilizers, it's diesel, it's interest rates as well. And the Strait of Hormuz being closed has made fertilizer prices rise again. We saw it, first of all, when Russia invaded Ukraine. For 18 months, it was higher then than it is now. But regardless, I think that there's going to have to be some further aid. We've given them $43 billion already. We added $65 billion to the crop insurance fund, $50 billion billion for rural health transformation as well, but I'm afraid we're going to have to give them some more to get them through this. And all that being said is that we are seeing net farm income improve. Under Joe Biden, we saw 2 years in a row of record drop in net farm income. Last year, we saw at least turn around a little bit. We got more work to do, but I'm afraid that as long as this Strait of Hormuz is closed, we're going to probably have to come back and help the farmers some more.
Wow. Let's talk about that when you do come back, Senator. The voice of Kansas in Republican Roger Marshall. Thank you, Doctor, for the insights. We're going to be hearing later on in the program from Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. He's at Apple's Cupertino headquarters after the company's new Siri AI platform was met with some lukewarm reaction by the market. The stock, in fact, dipping immediately after the rollout. Chip stocks, though, staged a bit of a comeback after last week's brutal sell-off, helping to lift the broader indexes. Let's turn now to power moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, live at World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Romaine.
Yeah, a brutal sell-off on Friday, trying to recoup some of those losses today. We should point out the S&P lost more than 2% last Friday. It's only recouped about 0.3 of that today. But when you go down the line and see what people were buying and selling, it really should be no surprise. The top 5 biggest movers in the S&P 500 were all chip stocks, and you see that reflected in the 6% move higher that we saw today in the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, an index that had plunged 10% on Friday, its biggest one-day drop going back to 2020. So it still has some ground to cover with regards to getting back where it was. But the idea here that a lot of people saw this as a dip buying opportunity. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, said that. Strategists at various Wall Street firms, including Morgan Stanley, UBS, Citi, also saying the same thing, that long-term fundamental story with regards to where all of that CapEx spending is going, that's still there. And if you can look past some of the geopolitical issues, maybe you could find some value. I want to turn your attention just real quickly here, Joe, to what we saw with Intel today, because those shares rallied hard, and it was a reminder of some of the opportunity out there, rising the most in about a month, up about 11%. This after we learned that Alphabet is actually going to rely on Intel for more than 3 million of these specialized AI chips that it's trying to develop, 3 million chips that it will buy through 2028.
Romaine, I just want to call your attention to some breaking news that's just crossing the terminal. We just got the S-1 filing from OpenAI. They have submitted a confidential S-1 filing to the SEC. This is the other big AI juggernaut IPO we've been looking for. Romaine, obviously Anthropic beat them to it, but the S-1 just hit from OpenAI. Walk us through what this will mean as we race toward what we're thinking a fall timeframe for these listings realistically could be possible, right?
It could be even shorter than that. We actually weren't expecting this S1 from OpenAI until later in the summer. Effectively, when they say they filed confidentially, it means they've submitted their information to the SEC, but a lot of the information there isn't public to you and I. Basically, it just says this is our intent to go public in short notice with regards to it could be weeks, it could be months. Of course, Anthropic put out its filing just a few days ago. So it gets a sense here that the two effectively biggest pure play AI companies out there are now trying to rush to market. And part of that probably has to do with SpaceX, which, of course, is supposed to price its IPO as soon as Thursday evening. We think of SpaceX, of course, as a rocket launch company, a satellite company. But when you looked at their S1 filing, it is clearly trying to position itself as an AI company. So effectively, 3 AI companies trying to rush to market. We don't know exactly what the valuation will be or where this will price. But I think it's safe to say, based on the private market valuations, Kaylee, that both Anthropic and OpenAI will likely be valued at or just above $1 trillion each.
Boy, you know, we were hearing analysis around the sell-off last week, Romaine, that some investors might be liquidating big gainers days ahead so they could buy stocks in the SpaceX IPO. What's a second and a third going to mean for this market this summer?
This has been the big question mark. Most of the market structure people that we've spoken to on the close have said that the market can't absorb this. They point to all of the liquidity out there. They also point to the cash on the sidelines. But you have to understand, Joe, this is uncharted territory. I remember, the biggest IPO that we've had worldwide was Saudi Aramco. That was a few years ago. And remember, that was not necessarily something that flowed through the NYSE or the NASDAQ. So we're talking about 3 big IPOs all flowing through presumably either one of the 2 largest exchanges here in the U.S. And investors are going to have to make some hard decisions, not only about whether they want this, because remember, there is a pull when it comes to sort of the passive investing out there, but more importantly, where the cash is going to come from to buy this, whether that's going to be at the expense of other names. It will remain to be seen, Joe, but this is going to be a huge test for this market.
You start wondering, Kaylee, how many roadshows investors can endure. It's kind of the same pitch over and over again here, isn't it?
Well, totally. My question remains as we consider, though, who's going to be buying this and with what money. Could we see the federal government getting stakes in these companies, if not through outright share purchases, donated stock? This is something that we know Sam Altman of OpenAI has floated the idea of having a public stake in these companies. But President Trump signaled last week he's open to this, too.
Yeah, President Trump has signaled that he was open to it. I could tell you right now, at least at this current stage, in order for something like that to happen, now that the S-1s are filed, this would effectively have to be something that would actually go through the roadshow process or in the secondary market, which I doubt the government would want to get involved in. That's assuming that they don't make any sort of special changes over at the SEC for them. But we should just point out, Kaylee, that the process here, that once you file these statements, it is pretty ironclad, sort of the steps that have to take place in order to get to the public markets here. And again, unless there's some sort of special exemption made for OpenAI and Anthropic, both of these companies are going to have to file those steps to a T.
Really great. Romaine, glad you're on with us when this landed. Thank you so much. Romaine Bostick live in New York with The Breaker. Just reading now in OpenAI's newsroom on X, a tweet, if you will. We recently submitted a confidential S1. We expect it to leak. So we're just announcing it. We have not decided on timing yet. It may be a while because there are things we want to do that are likely easier as a private company. A fascinating moment with a redhead on the terminal. And breaking news here on Balance of Power. Also tonight, Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, says he's had positive talks with U.S. officials just a day after meeting with European leaders in London. In a post on X, Zelensky said he had a very positive conversation with U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And the development comes after Russia rejected a ceasefire proposal which led Ukraine to launch a large-scale drone attack on Russia early Saturday. Joining us now again is Ambassador Bill Taylor, Distinguished Fellow with the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back. It's great to see you. Who's winning this war right now?
Right now, Ukraine is winning this war. Russia is not winning. Ukraine is actually taking back, Joe, more territory from the Russians than the Russians are.
They're moving the lines.
They're moving the lines. Not big, not a lot, but they're moving the lines. And as you've reported over and over, they're shooting deep into Russia. Mm-hmm. They're shooting at St. Petersburg when Putin is there. You know, they're sending that message. They can go deep. They can go all the way to the Urals Mountains, to the Arctic. So the Ukrainians have the initiative.
But for how long can they do so? Because we have to consider what they're using as munitions. Can the U.S., for example, continue to provide these things as we've deployed so many in the Middle East?
The U.S. is not providing them. Okay. You're right, Kaylee. It's exactly right. These missiles that the Ukrainians are firing, they're making. These are Ukrainian drones and Ukrainian missiles that they're firing at St. Petersburg, military targets. Let's be clear, military targets, naval bases, oil export facilities. But these are Ukrainians, so they don't need permission. They do need targeting information, and we've been providing that. The United States has been providing that with others. But these are Ukrainian-made drones.
How important was that attack on St. Petersburg you refer to see these massive plumes of black smoke over the city as Vladimir Putin watched and leaders from around the world came for their version of Davos, as many have called it? That seemed to be an event that impacted perception around the world.
Joe, I think you're exactly right. This is strategic communication by President Zelensky. Yeah. He's getting into a lot of people's heads, but he's getting into Putin's head. The letter that Zelensky sent to Putin with this proposal for a meeting also was very clear. You know, Putin's getting old, and he's tired. And Zelensky invited him to have a meeting to end this war. So it's part of the strategic communication.
Well, what about the communications happening inside the Kremlin? Bloomberg has reported the finance ministry has suggested to Putin that this is not going to be financially sustainable for much longer. Are those kind of voices ones that Putin's likely to heed?
He's likely to hear them. I mean, I think he's hearing them. You're asking the right question. Will he heed them? He wants to dominate Ukraine. He wants to eliminate Ukraine. And that's what he said over and over and over, which is why the Ukrainians are fighting so brilliantly and so strongly, so bravely, because it's existential for them. But when the finance minister goes in to Putin and says, this can't last, something's got to give. And if it's not Putin, it's going to be people around Putin.
Really interesting. To what extent could the U.S. help then with more interceptors more hardware, as Zelensky puts it, to help close the skies? Could it be determinative?
It could push Putin into a decision to end this war. That's where it's going to end. Okay. It's going to end when he realizes that Putin realizes he cannot win. And it's going to take pressure, and that could certainly help if the United States were very strong on the weapons, on the sanctions, and on the support for Ukraine.
So it's helpful that the House passed that measure.
Strong message. Strong message. Even if it doesn't get enacted, strong message to Putin, to the Ukrainians, and to the world.
All right, we'll leave it on that note. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. Ambassador Taylor, we so appreciate you joining us. William Taylor, of course, was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And coming up, we'll have much more on that news we just broke from OpenAI as they submit a confidential S-1 filing to the SEC. Of course, after Anthropic did so just days ago, we're now talking about all of these juggernauts that are coming to public markets, with SpaceX due to trade on Friday. The question, of course, we have, will we actually see government stakes in any of these? And we'll continue that conversation as we turn next to Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
There's a lot of heartburn over that weaponization fund. I don't think that there are many Republicans that dispute that the government has been weaponized, but there were just so many question marks about how it was created, where the funding came from, who was going to determine who received compensation and who didn't. It was just not something that I think was rolled out very well.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. And that was House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer speaking with us earlier today about the so-called anti-weaponization fund that the DOJ says it won't go forward with, even as President Trump floats the idea of reviving it, saying, quote, "I think the weaponization fund is a great idea, and so do many other Republicans." The question now is how much that push for the fund will jeopardize a jam-packed agenda for lawmakers. And joining us now from Capitol Hill for more is Bloomberg's Eric Wasson. So, Eric, obviously the Senate basically tried to declare this a dead issue when it wouldn't advance amendments to ban the weaponization fund in the reconciliation vote-a-rama last week. But has the president, in that Meet the Press interview, guaranteed that this is going to remain a live issue on the Hill this week and potentially beyond?
Well, I just talked to Speaker Mike Johnson. He's pretty confident that the House will be able to pass a $70 billion immigration enforcement bill without any amendments. There have been vocal critics like Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania calling for legislation to stop any attempt to revive this fund. But he seems to be in a small minority, with most Republicans willing to go along with the president. There's always a question of absences and whether that's going to pose a problem. But we believe that the House will be able on Tuesday to pass this immigration bill without changes. Now, if the president comes forward a day or two later and revives the fund, then there are going to be other problems. There are things on the agenda like the reauthorization of government spying powers. There's going to be the government funding bill at the end of September. There could be continued problems for the legislative agenda if this fund is revived. I will note, however, even without the specific fund, if the Attorney General is really determined to reward Trump allies or January 6 rioters, they can continue to settle lawsuits outside of court and pay these people from existing funds. So this remains an open question. If they do it before the midterms, there could certainly be political consequences. But, it's going to be an ongoing issue, I suspect, as long as the president is interested in rewarding his allies with payments of taxpayer dollars.
Well, how about FISA set to expire on Friday, Eric? We're going to talk to Congressman Krishnamoorthi in just a moment, who serves on the Intel Committee. And it does appear that Democrats are dropping like flies based on the commentary we heard on Sunday morning. And if you look at the social media feeds of any number of Democratic lawmakers, they are not happy with Bill Pulte as the DNI, and are not willing to advance this, what's widely known as must-pass legislation, albeit controversial. Could it actually expire this week?
Well, I'll tell you, Hakeem Jeffries, the top Democrat in the House, said that he will be a no as long as Bill Pulte is still on track to be the acting top spy chief in the Trump administration. This is someone who is the top housing official, has sort of pursued what many believe are trumped-up charges against Fed officials, other Democrats based on mortgage applications. There's a real sense among Democrats that this individual would weaponize intelligence to try to have retribution against Trump enemies. So they really want to see him gone. We asked John Thune in a scrum of reporters, do you expect a sort of a permanent DNI to be named to take this issue off the table? He didn't know, but he has sort of made clear that he doesn't believe Pulte is really the person for the job, saying last week that this would be a tough road for confirmation. So I think FISA's likely in trouble. My money would be on another short-term extension, but that may be even hard to pull off, and there are conservative, libertarian-leaning Republicans who also have a lot of problems with FISA. So Democratic votes are necessary. Thune also told us that, look, the one compromise bill on the table would have guardrails on it, to limit government spying powers, and this is a deal worth taking. Interestingly, also, the idea of a central bank digital currency also would continue to be banned in some of the drafts that are floating around, and that's of interest to the cryptocurrency world.
It's going to be another week on Capitol Hill. Eric, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Eric Wasson with us live from the Capitol. And joining us now for more on this, as promised, Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, who's a member of both the House Oversight and House Intelligence Committees. Congressman, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. We want your take on weaponization. We want your take on FISA. But I have to ask you about this breaking headline now. OpenAI is apparently going public. We don't have a date yet or some details, but they've made the filing, and it is now a public matter, as the company suggested that it probably would have leaked anyway. I'm wondering your thoughts on this, because we've spent a lot of time talking about regulations around this space, about our competition with China when it comes to AI. And now that President Trump seems to be embracing this idea, or at least open to this idea from Bernie Sanders, that the people take some sort of stake, or the government a stake in these companies. Should OpenAI be purchased once it's on the open market by the U.S. sovereign fund?
I don't know about that, but I have a couple other thoughts here, which is I think that obviously we're seeing a burgeoning AI industry, and we don't see all the fruits of that success kind of trickling down or making its way to people who are kind of my constituents. And so they are very, very concerned about kind of the growing wealth of this group of people. So
wouldn't taking a stake give the government a seat at the table and therefore the people? Is there something to that?
Well, I think there are other things that need to be done. So, for instance, we're seeing these data centers come up all over the place. Yeah. And a lot of people are concerned that basically they are increasing the cost of living in our communities. And basically AI companies are not doing enough to shoulder the burden of their growth. Number two, I would just say, remember, the health of the AI industry is going to also depend on whether Donald Trump allows the export of the highest-end semiconductor chips to China, which he is entertaining as we speak. And I think that would be disastrous for our future competitive posture. And then number three, I do think we have to take very seriously concerns about AI safety. People at Anthropic and other places talk openly about how, AI is growing, the technology is accelerating so quickly that, for instance, the Mythos model, which I believe is a breakthrough model based on my classified briefings about it, are now opening up the possibility of real superintelligence or artificial general intelligence in the future, which nobody is talking about regulating. And so that's something that we need to put guardrails on ASAP.
We're just getting fresh headlines across the Bloomberg terminal that I'll just mention for our audience here on Bloomberg, Congressman, that OpenAI is planning to launch a tender sale of shares before its eventual IPO. This, according to a person familiar with the matter who said that tender will be held in the coming weeks. To switch gears off of this AI topic, though, I do want to go back to what we were just discussing with our colleague Eric on the Hill around reauthorization of FISA. The deadline is Friday. It doesn't seem like this is going anywhere very quickly in the Senate over protest of Bill Pulte being tapped as acting director of national intelligence. As you have a seat on the Intel Committee, what is the risk of allowing this issue over Pulte to lead to this program potentially going dark? What would that mean for our national security if it lapses?
Well, I think that would be an unfortunate event, to say the least. I think that we have to pull Pulte at this point. I think Trump needs to pull Pulte to save FISA, because if he's still the acting director, if he's put into that position, I just don't see FISA passing. And we know that FISA is important for collecting intelligence on the bad guys. Now, I have concerns about the collection of intelligence on Americans, and there need to be reforms which people are negotiating, but those negotiations aren't going to go anywhere if Pulte ultimately is in charge, because we know his only claim to fame is using sensitive information against the president's political enemies. And if he is put in charge of the intelligence community, not only would he have access to sensitive information, but also classified information. And I think that would give Democrats basically all they need to know about how FISA is going to be used. And I don't think he's going to get any Democratic votes in that case.
Well, so then FISA expires on Friday, right, Congressman? Should we be prepared for that?
It could. I think that the president needs to think very clearly about the situation right now and put the national interest above his private interest, because Pulte is viewed here as just another of the president's henchmen.
Well, Bill Pulte, it doesn't appear he's changing his mind on this. What if he suggested a time frame, for instance, in which he would have a permanent replacement named? Would that help? Because he clearly wants Bill Pulte to start this job and fire some people, right? He wants a house cleaning.
I know.
In our intelligence services.
I don't think people around here would stand Pulte for one day on the job, because you can do a lot of damage in 1 minute or 1 hour, and with his supposed intention to fire people across the intelligence community, I could just see this become a disaster very quickly.
Well, and of course, there's the consideration of what exactly all of this intelligence is gathered to inform terrorist threats, yes, but also our positioning when it comes to places like the Middle East amid an ongoing conflict with Iran. We saw, Congressman, that flare up in violence between Iran and Israel. Overnight, they have decided to stop shooting mutually, it seems, at least for the time being. But is the United States going to be able to control what decisions Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu makes from here, given his own domestic considerations? Is there a risk in your mind that Israel kind of goes rogue in terms of its decisions here?
Yes, and that's in part why I think this war needs to end. It's an illegal, unconstitutional war. The president does not want to bring this particular war to Congress to get the consent of the American people, because he knows it's so unpopular. It hurts them economically. It hurts America's economically. You don't have to go further than the gas pump. And it erodes our national security. And so the only people cheering for this war at this point, I think, are the Chinese Communist Party, Putin, and others who might be reaping profits from the billions of dollars in oil revenue that have kind of materialized because of this war.
Of course, War Powers has passed the House. Are you convinced that there's an actual dialogue going on here, Congressman, or does the president need to start listening to Congress about the way forward in Iran?
He keeps telling us every other day that there's a deal that will be announced later that day. It never happens. I just don't think it's going to happen, because the Iranians have the upper hand. They have the leverage. They have control of the Strait of Hormuz. And now we are in a position that is worse off than we were before the war, because they have de facto control of the Strait of Hormuz. And they know that they can wait out this war longer than basically Donald Trump can. And so I think that my humble observation is that we are now stuck in a quagmire, and basically Congress is kind of pointing the way. And as you said, a war powers resolution for the first time attracted enough Republican votes to pass the House. That should give the president a signal that the American people are done with this war. Time to bring the troops home.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois. We appreciate it. Coming up, there's mania in Midtown Manhattan tonight as the Knicks and Spurs get set for Game 3 of the NBA Finals at Madison Square Garden, with President Trump in attendance and a lot of security for that reason. We'll get into that next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. In New York, President Trump will be at Madison Square Garden shortly for Game 3 of the NBA Finals as the Knicks host the Spurs in just under 2 hours. Security preparations have been underway throughout the day as the biggest sporting event in the city in years is about to get underway. And that's where we find our very own Anne-Marie Hordern, who is traveling with the president and in the White House pool for this event. Anne-Marie, I think that makes you the luckiest, one of the luckiest journalists in the business this evening. What are you seeing? What's the security perimeter like? What's the vibe?
Well, look, New York is totally excited. It's Knicks mania. I was in Manhattan earlier today. I'm back in New Jersey as we are waiting for liftoff to go to New York City, where the president will then make his way to Madison Square Garden. But as you say, he's the first sitting U.S. president to attend an NBA Finals game. So the security measures are pretty intense in New York. And we heard from NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch this morning, and she's talking about the fact that only ticket holders, Penn Station travelers, or anyone who has to do business in the area can get into the security perimeter. It's like 10 blocks that are locked off in Midtown Manhattan. We're talking about the streets from West 30th to West 35th, if you know Manhattan, between 6th and 8th Avenue. So the heart of New York. And for New Yorkers, it's going to be mixed feelings. I'm sure you guys have seen the videos. Knicks fans love to gather outside Madison Square Garden. They love a watch party. There's crowd surfing when the Knicks win. It's just absolutely electric. And now there's just watch parties in different parts of the city because the president is coming. And that has some people certainly on edge, which means I think potentially this evening. And I was with the president when he went to a Yankee game, and he had mixed reception. So potentially you hear some boos, but also potentially some cheers.
There are questions about whether he gets booed. Not only did they cancel the watch party, Anne-Marie, but they told everyone they had to get there 2 hours early and undergo TSA-style security. I'm curious about what are the accommodations for you in the press pool? We understand the president's going to be in a skybox. Will you be with him or down on the court?
We will not be in the suite the president's in. I believe he'll be there with James Dolan. Also, Mayor Zohran Mamdani is going to be in attendance. Not clear if him and Trump will actually meet at the Knicks game. I believe the press is going to be where other members of the press from our friends in the sports industry cover the game.
Got it.
Unclear, though, exactly where, but I have been told we will be able to view the game, and hopefully we'll also have eyesight of where the president is.
Wow. All right. We need to stay in touch, Anne-Marie. We're all living vicariously through you. Thank you for dialing us up here. On her way to Madison Square Garden. Oh, there you go. Well, boy, he better hope they win tonight, right? Are you in the building, Anne-Marie?
This is the thing. No. I'm waiting at an airport so we can get lifted to Lower Manhattan.
Okay. Got it.
The thing is, if they lose tonight, Stephen A. Smith, who I'm sure you guys know, came out and said, I'm blaming the president of the United States of America if the Knicks lose tonight. He said it's not about politics. It's just that it's created logistical issues and, some of the vibes people think could be off because of his presence.
Stephen A. Smith. Maybe he'll launch his own campaign, depending on how this goes. Anne-Marie, thank you. Stay safe there. Let us know what's happening. As we assemble our political panel, Two people not at Madison Square Garden. Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, Republican strategist and Democratic strategist. Jeanne, Zaino, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Great to have you both here. You could be there if you want. I know you have access to the good tickets. Does he need to hope that the Knicks win tonight? I'm being serious.
Yeah, no, I think he should hope that the Knicks win tonight, because the last thing you want, on top of everything else that he's got going on, is to get blamed for a loss.
Yeah.
You know, in a town that's waited 50 years for, this moment in time.
Why let the boss go if you really believe he's going to be booed?
I don't think anybody had any choice on this one.
Okay,
I mean, first of all, he loves the Garden. We know that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Many events that he's done there over time. And he's a New Yorker down deep. I know he's changed his registration. I know he fled the city because of all the bad politics and prosecutions. But at the end of the day, he's a New Yorker. And regardless of politics, Knicks reign supreme.
Okay.
Well, so even if he is a real Knicks fan, at least for tonight, Jeanne, is he taking something away from the other Knicks fans who aren't going to be able to gather outside the Garden if they couldn't afford to get into the building like he can in the first place?
That's what we are hearing. I mean, it is, I think Anne-Marie summed it up. There is so much excitement in New York. I even have my jersey, guys. It's right here.
Oh, wow. All right.
You should have worn it on the air, Jeanne.
I know I should have, Kaylee. But, there's people who are like strange bedfellows. Like Ann Coulter is criticizing Donald Trump, saying this is narcissistic. And then Whoopi Goldberg, of all people, is saying, hey, he's a New Yorker, let him in. But, you're in the midst of an affordability crisis. People can't afford the thousands of dollars these tickets are, and you rob them of being outside even and at watch parties, and then you make us pay for it. I think he's going to hear a few boos when he goes in there, but who knows who's in there? It's not going to be the common people. It'll be people who can afford it.
That's right. I keep reading this. It might not be the normal demographics, and maybe it's a Trump-loving, wealthy crowd. But maybe they'll boo Mayor Mamdani then, Jeanne. He says he's going to sit in a very different section than Donald Trump. How does he play this to his favor?
And those two have like a bromance. I'm going to be really curious to see if they somehow connect. But, I was just looking. Trump's approval ratings in New York are -30, if you can believe it. So if I was Mamdani, you stay a little bit away if you can. You don't go into that box. Maybe get on the floor, be at least one of the people who can afford those $250,000, whatever they are, tickets on the floor.
Well, I wonder if the game's not going well tonight, if the president's going to stick it out for the duration, or if he might get up and leave. We saw him get up and walk out of an interview with Kristen Welker on Meet the Press that aired yesterday. Let's just remind our audience of how that went down.
Your elections are crooked, and you're crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked, and so is ABC, and CBS, and CNN.
But Mr. President,
you're one-sided crooked networks. All right, let's call it quits, because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time.
Mr. President, let's please. I traveled all the way to Wisconsin.
I've sat in the rain with you.
I know.
I've sat in the rain with you for an hour,
Wisconsin.
on and off in the rain, and I've given you enough time. You ought to straighten out your press, because you know what?
Mr.
A country can never be great with a dishonest
Listen,
press.
we
Come on,
traveled
let's go.
all the way to Wisconsin for this interview.
And we should note, rain did disrupt their interview multiple times. It was about 40 minutes into that moment happened. So he had been sitting with her for some time, Rick. But is that a good look, especially if it's relitigating elections past that, as she noted, there's been no evidence were rigged?
Yeah, no, I mean, every time he gets a chance, and a question comes up about the elections, in this case, potentially California's election, the outcome, he wants to litigate that, right? He feels wronged by that. And look, I mean, I think most people really understand the facts of this at this stage, right? I mean, so he's only hurting himself when he brings up these concerns about the elections in 2020 that were all disproven, right? There's literally not a single bit of evidence that anything affected the outcome of that election. I mean, like, if he's going to take the time to make a big deal about this, he's only hurting himself. Nobody else is buying this other than a few dead-enders within the MAGA coalition who are holding out for somebody to say, oh, the elections were fraudulent.
Pretty wild. He wasn't just talking about 2020. He's talking about California. Jeanne, last week, in the throes of a primary cycle, is this something that Democrats can seize on?
It is to a certain extent, but I'll tell you, it's this primary, it's also the midterm. I mean, this is, quintessential Donald Trump. He openly has said repeatedly, my strategy is to attack the messenger, to muddle up the message, and to make people distrust what they say going forward. And so he continues to attack the 2020 election results, the primary elections in California, and I'm sure the elections in November, if the results are not what he wants. Interestingly, he never attacks when he wins, only when his side loses.
Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors, thank you both. I don't know, I had more fun talking about the basketball game. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter. Find it on the terminal and online. You staying up late for this tonight?
Oh, that's past my bedtime. But I think I have to root for the Knicks just on principle. A lot of our colleagues are in New York. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.